So, hello everyone, and welcome back to Fugitive Chefs, the show about chefs and people in food basically who have stepped outside traditional kitchens to create something more meaningful, more personal, more sustainable in many cases. And today's guest is Chef Ned Bell. Thanks for accepting the invitation and welcome to the podcast.
Good day. How are you, Furqan? Nice to be here, and thanks very much for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure. So, just to tell you a little more about you, Ned, to the people. But what I know about you already is, Ned is based in Canada. He's a Canadian chef, educator, and also a passionate advocate for sustainable seafood. I think that's the biggest message that I've seen from all your posts, be it social media or the reports that I've seen about you. What I've seen is that your journey has taken you from, say, top restaurants to finding something called Chefs for Oceans, and I want to know more about it during this conversation. You've also worked with leading culinary programs and working a lot with protecting these oceans, but through food. So basically, in this episode, we'll talk a little about what can a chef's purpose be to go beyond the kitchen and do activism like this, and how does activism actually welcome profiles like yours, how education welcomes profiles like yours, and how can we actually build a food system that sustains both people and the planet, and the person connecting these is somebody like your profile. But before we dive into all of that, Ned, could you tell us like a little more about how did you end up into cooking as a career? Like, why was cooking your choice of career?
Absolutely. Well, yeah, there's so much to talk about. I mean, my path was probably pretty similar to very many chefs. I started my very first job at the age of 14 was washing dishes in the local restaurant. Kind of I don't know, I felt at home in the restaurant community, the family of restaurants. I came from a divorced parents and a broken home, so the fact that I had this group of great people to work with and kind of lean on in my teenage years became quite valuable to me, and I really just fell in love with hospitality. To be honest, I love. I mean, washing dishes is probably the most important job in the kitchen. But like from there,
Mm.
then you recognize that putting food on a plate is, it has value to it. You're feeding people and you get feedback every single meal you serve. You get some feedback, both positive and constructive from your patients from your guests. And, then I don't know, after graduating high school, I just knew I wanted to go into the culinary arts. I went to culinary school. This was a long time ago before Food Network even existed here in North America. And
Hmm.
so I really went to school to be a chef, not to be,
Okay.
a celebrity chef or something on television. Like I wanted to cook. And, kind of in North America, like a very, Western European sort of hierarchical kitchen where you have,
Hmm.
one chef at the top wearing a big tall hat, and you kind of work under him because truthfully a lot of the chefs back then were men. And it was very kind of rooted in the sort of structure of the military. You had the big chief and then you had everybody else that sort of fell underneath him. But you know, I I I felt at home in that environment because I enjoyed the structure. I enjoyed
Hmm.
the direction. I probably even thrived on some of the sort of like, I don't want to say abuse, but like, the kind of the high expectation and the kind of, the pressure to perform. I really
Hmm.
thrived on that. And so, that was, I mean, I'm 52 years old, so I've been in the kitchen, well over 30 years now. And I just love what I do. I feel very fortunate to be a cook.
Yeah, that sounds quite a journey, right? And I mean, before we get into like what got you out of the kitchen, I would really like to hear more about like were there people or I don't know, people who were inspiring for you, or kind of people who you got to work with, which you would like to kind of share with us. What did you learn in those years when you see those first few years in the kitchens? How was it for you?
Yeah, I was really lucky. I did my apprenticeship at the best French restaurant in Vancouver, a restaurant that's still
Hmm.
around 40 years later. The chef there is my mentor, Chef Michel Jacob. He's from Alsace in France, and he's, that classic sort of French chef, very strict, very high expectations. He's the only man I still call chef because he will always be my chef because, you do an apprenticeship for 3 years underneath somebody. And you go to battle, you go to war for them. And, he's still a big, big part of my life today. He's my mentor and has been my whole career. And I was really lucky. Getting an apprenticeship like I did at this restaurant in Vancouver was, I sort of liken it to going to Harvard. It's sort of like,
Hmm.
it's the best of the best, like when you work for someone like that, and you put in the time, you put in the years, no one can ever take that foundation away from you. So my early education and my early sort of, I guess, setting of my culinary journey was really, really important to me. Doesn't exist the same anymore. The culinary field has changed immensely. You don't need to do a traditional apprenticeship to be an incredible chef. But back then, it was really the only path you could take. If you want to be a chef wearing a white jacket like this, you have to work for, a great chef and, put your head down, shut up and do the job,
Hmm.
and there was some good and some bad, but for me, there was far more good than anything else.
Yeah, and how do you process that? Because while you were talking about it before, you said like it's not like this anymore. I was curious myself because when you speak about the way you look up to your mentor, for example, and the way you also mentioned how I know, and it's normal to accept that a lot of us function really good under pressure, and we kind of want that pressure, we like that pressure, especially when it's with people around you who are also going through the same. So there's empathy, and that is kind of thriving in that. But how do you see that when I think later on in your career you also become somebody who others are looking up to, or people who are depending on you, or you're training them, or you are setting the rules of the kitchen? How does that transition work for you, seeing today's scenario where kitchens maybe do not accept that much, maybe people speak up before this kind of pressure breaks down? How do you see this transformation? Because a lot of chefs I've spoken to who are younger say that the older generation, or the ones who have been longer years in the kitchen, want us to just go through it because it was difficult for them and it should be difficult for everybody else. How do you see that transition within your span of kitchen career?
Yes, certainly, I really looked at my career like the first 10 years were me becoming a chef. After that, I
Hmm.
then was able to become my version of a chef. So early days, you just repeat what you saw. So you do similar things to what you sort of, were taught or trained, or, maybe how you were spoken to, or, maybe how you were treated. Maybe in the back of your mind, knowing that some of it was inappropriate and some of it wasn't cool even back then. But then when you start running your own kitchens in your sort of mid to late 20s and into your 30s, you realize I don't want to run my kitchens like that, because that's just not who I am as a person. I bring kindness, I bring thoughtfulness. I know that I get, I get more bees with honey than I do, with anything else. I think I've seen like the bad, so to speak, and now I've
Hmm.
seen the transition to the slightly better. I wouldn't say we're where we need to be in North America when it comes to how certain kitchens are run. It's a very toxic environment, or it can be. I'm a white middle-aged man, and I was trained by a white middle-aged man, so there's an incredible amount of
Hmm.
privilege that I recognize. And so how can I create an environment in my kitchens where I have diversity, where I have cultural influence, whether, indigenous cuisine and culture and impact is huge here in British Columbia on the western side of Canada where I live. The indigenous peoples have been here for 12,000 years, a heck of a lot longer than we as Canadians have been in this country, of only 150 years. The US is only 250 years. So like, we have a
Hmm.
ton to learn and atone for. And immigration has been the birth of our country. I mean, everybody from Western Europe that came here, and then everybody from all over the place that came here, whether it be the Chinese, whether it be the South Asians, whether it be people from, all over the planet that sort of migrated to North America over the last couple hundred years. Really, that's sort of like why my food is what I call globally inspired and locally created, because it's inspired by all these great flavors and these great people bringing their flavors here. Then it's using local ingredients from this place to sort of make it unique to this place. And so
Hmm.
I try really hard And I think I've been relatively successful at creating environments in my restaurants and in my kitchens where kindness, joy, high expectation, we don't allow sort of mistakes to be made, but we don't like scream and yell at people when they make those mistakes. Like those days
Right.
should have never been, but they did for decades. We have to
Hmm.
and are slowly moving past to that. And I think you're seeing that in Michelin restaurants, you're seeing that in premium casual restaurants, certainly independent restaurants, that if you want to keep good people, you got to treat them properly.
No, definitely, and I think what makes it easier is the points you mentioned. I feel the ones I really liked are the recognition. I mean, recognition of privilege, as you said, or recognition of when is it your place to have an opinion, when is it not your place to have an opinion. So once you can have an opinion, and then you still know that at that point, as you said, I was becoming a chef, and that was a process you had to go through. But then again, there's a point in life in kitchen career where you come to a certain point where you can make these choices, and when you're the one who's setting the rules of the game. And I think, yeah, it's very inspiring to hear all of this whole context of how you have personally taken this upon, because I think a lot of chefs in the industry, I mean, firstly, I think the Michelin ones, because the eyes are bigger eyes on them, I guess, and there's a more amount of younger people interning over there or staging over there, so they have this pressure. But not everybody does this job well, I feel. So it's very inspiring to hear what's your take on it.
It's really interesting. Michelin only came to Vancouver 3 or 4 years ago. And I
Hmm.
think we have, only eight Michelin one-star restaurants in Vancouver. And it's a world-class city.
Okay. Right.
We've had restaurants over the last couple of decades that could and should have been Michelin recommended or Michelin starred. But we didn't have Michelin here because, as you know, Michelin is a bit of a pay-to-play model where usually you have to, like, invite them here and write them a big check. Anyway, a lot of the first generation of Michelin chefs were all white. And so in Vancouver, and now you're seeing chefs like, I know that you just interviewed Imran in Toronto, and you
Right.
have this fantastic chef here named Tushar and this other fantastic chef named Vish, like Michelin level guys, from other places, born in other places, but now sort of live here and are putting incredible food on the plate. And so it's no longer a Western lens that dictates. It's no longer only a Western European lens that
Hmm.
dictates what Michelin is. And Michelin's been progressive for a long time. I mean, you could go to Hong Kong and have a Michelin one-star bowl of wonton soup, or, a Michelin bowl of ramen in Tokyo. But in Vancouver, it's still very kind of super fine dining, super small restaurant, 40, 50 seats maximum. Like, I think we're going to see that will continue to broaden. And I mean,
Hmm.
that's a whole other conversation. Is Michelin still relevant? Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, I couldn't agree more with all you're saying. But just to get back on this idea of the podcast, because now we have kind of established where your beginnings of your career was and what your career looked like, and then what is today like. Tell us a little about what is it that you do every day. How do you define the job that you do today?
Yeah, so it's it's a bit of a journey to how I got to where I am. So
Mm-hmm.
I was the executive chef for the Four Seasons Hotel for 5+ years, back from 2011 to 2017. And during that time, we became the first luxury hotel in the country, so in Canada, to become 100% ocean wise, which means all of the seafood that we served on our menu, we were a seafood restaurant, was ocean wise recommended, which was very rare, and hence the first one ever. Back in 1999, in Monterey, California, the Seafood Watch program was started by the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and it was basically the first sustainability ratings system in North America. MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council, started in London years ago, before, but in North America, 1999 was basically the birth of the sustainable seafood movement. But that was just in the US. Canada had to wait another 6 years. 2005, we started a program called Oceanwise, and it was a sustainable
Mm-hmm.
seafood program with a clear focus on chefs, our restaurants, and then our suppliers. So our suppliers could be our fishers, our fishmongers, or our big suppliers that drive the seafood from the wharf to our restaurants. And so I We have a very big country, 13 provinces and territories. It's 4,000 kilometers tall, 9,000 kilometers wide. Like, it's a huge place. We have, seafood on the East Coast, seafood on the West Coast, seafood north of us. So we have the Atlantic Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and the Pacific Ocean surround our country. And then we have these huge bodies of water in the middle of it, the Great Lakes, where we have all these
Right.
inland fisheries. So we're one of the only places in the world that has all these oceans that collide on the same country. So, you know, chefs are pulling seafood from the East Coast, from the West Coast, not so much from the North, but slowly from the North. So I started to recognize that it was, we as chefs had this unique opportunity to engage with each other and then the people that we feed on the importance of choosing sustainable seafood, healthy lakes, oceans, and rivers.
Mm.
Every second breath we take comes from the ocean. And arguably, the birth of our nation, the birth of Canada, was on the backs of the fishing industry on the East Coast. So, Newfoundland and the coastal
Mm-hmm.
shores of the East Coast, a couple of hundred years ago, people came here from Spain, from Europe, from Portugal to fish for our cod, and then they would take it back to Europe. I mean, you've heard of salt cod, bacalao before. That's Canadian fish, right? So, but of course, it wasn't Canada back then. It was just a place to fish.
Uh-huh.
And so,
Yeah.
Canada is an extractive country. Mine minerals, we cut down trees for forestry, furs and fish and forests were the birth of our nation. And so, as we spread west across Canada over, the last couple of hundreds of years, we landed on the West Coast, and we're the only place on the planet that has 5 unique species of wild Pacific salmon. Wild Pacific salmon is a keystone species. It is so incredibly important to the entire health of our ecosystem. Trees, whales, bears, eagles, and humans need wild salmon to thrive because it's a circular ecosystem. And so if you take too much of one of those things, the entire ecosystem will collapse. And so overfishing and climate change are the two largest threats that face our world's oceans. The fishery on the East Coast collapsed in the 1990s, and we're kind of facing the same sort of thing on the West Coast with wild Pacific salmon right now. Now, it's a very complex conversation. It's difficult to really dive
Mm-hmm.
into all the nuance. But I recognize that chefs could potentially raise awareness and educate each other, and at the same time serve the highest quality and best seafood. Not always the most expensive, but the highest quality and best seafood. In fact, challenge our fishers and our farmers to continue to do better or to do better, etc. The one thing is that because our country is so big, chefs on the West Coast
Mm.
don't talk to the chefs on the East Coast. And Toronto's the biggest city in Canada, followed by sort of Montreal, Vancouver, and then there's sort of medium-sized cities, around. So I thought, well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to ride my bike across Canada in the summer of 2014. So I started in St. John's, Newfoundland on Canada Day, which is July 1st, and I rode
Okay.
all the way back to Vancouver. So 8,700
Wow.
kilometers doing 24 events with the best chefs in the country. And we founded Chefs for Oceans, basically a collective of chefs that are having deep conversations around healthy lakes, oceans, and rivers, sustainable seafood, and the future of our oceans and what our menus will and might look like, and truthfully need to look like into the future.
Mm-hmm.
We only eat 4 species of fish in North America: something white, something pink, something red, and by far the most consumed seafood in North America is shrimp, often farmed, often somewhere else, whether it's Bangladesh or
Right.
Vietnam or whatever. So, whitefish, cod or halibuts, orange fish or, pink fish, salmon, and redfish,
Mm.
tuna, right? So we only eat 4 things. And,
Yeah.
I mean, there's 10,000 edible plants in the ocean. Like, we should be eating more seaweed and more sea vegetables. But unfortunately, in North America, because we don't have a ton of historical culture, we like square
Mm-hmm.
chunks of flavorless protein in the middle of our plate, and we need to diversify that.
Yeah. And how was this? I mean, Ned, how was this interest born? Because knowing all this, researching all of this, was it some point of career that you had time for this, or how did you get the time out for this? Was it just curiosity? Like, how do you become an expert on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, it started slowly. I became a founding member of Oceanwise in 2005, founding chef member.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the next sort of, bunch of years, kind of became deeply involved in the work. I was born on a farm in the Okanagan Valley, which is kind of
Okay.
where our wine region is here in British Columbia. And then I was raised on the ocean over on Vancouver Island. And so, grew up fishing for salmon with my dad. So I think I was just like committed to farmers and fishers from a young age. That's one of the reasons maybe why I sort of fell into culinary arts, because I've
Right.
just been surrounded by food my whole life. And
Mm-hmm.
then I don't know, like British Columbia we live in a rainforest. So we live on the ocean surrounded by mountains and the rainforest. So like the environment is every day of our life. And so when like
Mm-hmm.
today we have these massive forest fires that are burning in the United States and coming up here.
Right.
And forest fire season is now a thing every year. And like, it's like literally the skies are blanketed in forest fire smoke right now in Vancouver. And so I don't
Mm-hmm.
know that there's a more important conversation than, you know, the health of our food system, our fishers, our farmers, our makers, our artisans, our processors, and of course, the species that we, are fortunate enough to either raise, right, like animals on land or
Mm-hmm.
animals in the ocean, or harvest the fish that we catch, and
Mm.
chefs have this unique sort of opportunity to be a conduit to those conversations.
Yeah, but just a sentence you finished on, right, Ned? So I have this two-faceted question for you. First of all, I believe with these initiatives, with these movements, you do end up working with governmental organization, research institutes, which are also, tracking water temperatures and migration of fishes, the climate change within their the microclimate they have within the oceans. So first question is, how much do these people who are into these more scientific, technical things of the world believe chefs can contribute to this improvement, change, movement, whatever you call it? And how many chefs do you speak to think that the world counts with their help to fix these changes? Is it an understood thing that chefs do have a role to play in this? Or do you, or a lot of work of yours is also to convince people that chefs do have to take up on these challenges?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I've been fortunate to be surrounded by really passionate and committed chefs for quite a long time, because I think when you grow up in the environment the way we do here,
Mm-hmm.
it's it it's all of us are sort of in that conversation. We're constantly talking about the environment, forestry, fisheries. We have a lot of like a pretty strong activist movement here. One of the world's most famous scientists, David Suzuki, is based in British Columbia, and he's a
Mm-hmm.
huge voice for the last couple of generations here in this country. A friend of mine who co-founded Oceanwise just got the Order of Canada, which is like the highest order in our country for
Wow.
like work in sustainability. I actually this label on my arm, so
Mm-hmm.
I'm the chef for our province. So I do all
Okay.
kinds of work in and around, as I said, farmers and fishers and makers and artisans and processors. So like basically promoting British Columbia food and Canadian food to Canadians, because we import a ton, of course,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what's delicious
Yeah.
about our world. But we also have tons of those people, in our own backyards. I think food specifically, and then maybe
Mm-hmm.
a dotted line to chefs, is like a safe place to have a conversation about a healthy environment. Like whether it's a family meal,
Right.
whether it's a shared meal with a bunch of CEOs, whether it's a shared meal with a bunch of politicians. Usually a lot gets done around the dinner table, or the quote unquote dinner
Mm-hmm.
table. And I've worked with politicians across the country. I've worked with politicians in the United States. I've traveled the world on the backs of sustainable seafood, whether it be to Portugal or Ireland or Spain or Tokyo or Vietnam, or, like all over the place learning about seafood, mostly because we bring that stuff here, like we import it. And
Mm.
so we want to go back to the source and sort of understand, like, how do they farm shrimp in Bangladesh? How do they farm shrimp in Vietnam? Where's the tuna fishery in the Philippines? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
obviously Japanese culture is huge right now globally, and we import a ton of seafood from Japan. We also have a huge Japanese
Mm-hmm.
diaspora here. So I think that chefs just have almost like a disarming ability to give you something delicious to eat. And if I put something tasty in your belly, you're going to like me. And if you like me, you're going to
Mm-hmm.
listen to my message.
Right. And how much of this is reverse engineered? Because I work with one of the companies over here through my work, which is basically they have a fish farm for sea bass in the Canary Islands. It's called Aquanaria, and now this brand works a lot. I mean, they used to work first only with this sea bass they are growing. It's not a wild sea bass. It's one that they are culturing, and they used to work primarily on improving the yield from it and kind of making recipes on and off, working with chefs, but not really, like, not very much focusing on chefs as their representatives. And now they have taken this new kind of curve where they have realized when the chef asks the wholesaler or the producer or the supplier for this specific chef, they have this kind of power to kind of get onto this country's map of being on their markets, you know. So how much of that effect do you see in kinds of convincing that you're doing? Because I guess you're also kind of rating which season what fish is better or which producer is kind of, when you're going and visiting all these farms who are using better methods, how much of a say does a chef have when they ask for this produce? Do the choices that a chef makes on a menu, how much does it affect? Even though I believe the chef can't see it, which is what makes it difficult to convince them that the choices you make every day in ordering for a restaurant do make a difference on the global environment.
I
What would you like to say about that?
I think that chefs are part of the team. Like for me, I
Mm-hmm.
use marine biologists, I use science, I use ratings systems, like what I would call, like as I mentioned to you earlier, the arms of the octopus. Like I call it the ocean guardians, right? So like it's not just chefs, it's all these other people, has to be based in data and science. So I was literally
Right.
talking to a doctor this morning on my walk with my dog on the east coast of Canada about tuna fisheries because I have a question, like I have these guys on speed dial and they're like doctors in science
Mm-hmm.
for marine biology, right? I never thought that that would be a conversation that I'd be having on the regular, but it's incredibly important
Mm-hmm.
because I want to be confident that when I put something on my menu, I have done the work. I have put in the research or, you know, found the research and done the work. And so yeah, I call it the Ocean Guardians. It's a collection of people that I need to be able to make the best decision. And then I can be a leader for my peer group and go and teach and
Mm-hmm.
share and tell them through traditional and social media, etc. I mean, it's complicated, right? Seafood at the end of the day
Yeah.
is a marketed commodity, whether it's fished or
Mm-hmm.
farmed, right? Whether it's, I forget what it's called. Oh yeah, Ora King, this famous salmon that's farmed in New Zealand that it has a
Uh-huh.
huge footprint here in or huge presence here in North America. Like that's a a brilliant marketing ploy, right? Like here's a fish, it
Yeah.
has,
Yeah.
they put a name on it, it's high quality, and they can ship it all over the world. Maybe like
Yeah.
your sea bass. I would say the foundation of the work that I do actually came from late 1990s. I was running a kitchen in Toronto, and our number one fish was Chilean sea bass. We sold it
Oh, yeah.
so much. We sold it to
Mm-hmm.
basically, destruction, depletion, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it became the poster child for sustainability. Like, take it off your menus right now because we are fishing this
Yeah.
Patagonian toothfish to extinction. And then basically we did stop and they've recovered the fishery a little bit, but we just shifted our focus
Mm-hmm.
to other fish, right? I mean, now
Okay.
we have like wild Alaskan black cod is called sablefish here in British Columbia. It's
Mm-hmm.
basically a very similar fish. Again, it's because
Okay.
North Americans want square chunks of whitefish, pinkfish, redfish, or by far the most consumed seafood, as I said, is shrimp, right? And
Mm.
often
Mm-hmm.
farmed. So yeah, it's I think chefs are, on my hand, one of the five guardians that I sort of
Mm-hmm.
rely on for knowledge.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you see the role of education, Ned? Because one thing is you walk up to a chef who's already running a restaurant, has already a lot to care about, and then has to kind of listen to you. And I think they have to have a personal drive and a commitment to the values. They have to align their values to be wanting to do this. I would say I don't think it can be an extra work, but it does require kind of any choice you make requires a time from your schedule, right? And how do you see the job of culinary schools or places which could put this kind of an education early on? Have you tried like tapping onto these sources of education?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, it's a bit of a disappointing question slash answer because
Mm,
I don't think culinary schools have done enough. And I actually don't think, it's an interesting dynamic. Often culinary schools have a lot of older guard chefs running their programs. Maybe
mm,
they haven't
mhm,
been, they've been out of the game for quite a long time. They're not,
right.
their fingers aren't on the pulse today. And so,
Mm,
how important is sustainable seafood? And then they're running a business, right? And so they need to
yeah,
truthfully choose the cheapest fish for their students to use because they're trying to make money, right? Like that's what it
of
kind of
course.
comes down to. I definitely see culinary schools as a huge opportunity for education. I don't see it
Mhm,
happening very much, unfortunately. Not the ones that I'm close to. I wish they did a better
right.
job. I mean, education is key. It's,
Yeah.
for me, why do I do this work? No one pays me to care about the oceans. I care about the oceans because I
Mhm,
care about the oceans, right? And as a result of that, I have knowledge. I get to choose the best quality and the quote unquote most sustainable fish for my menus. Like to me, that's valuable. And
mhm,
I know that my
yeah.
guests find it valuable. When I was running the Four Seasons kitchen, we had a sustainable seafood restaurant, and when I took it over, it was doing about $5 million a year in revenue. When I left 5 years later, it was doing $11 million in revenue. Why? Because we were by default only serving sustainable seafood. So our customers knew the quality was high. Our customers knew that they were making the best choice when they walked in the front door. That's why we grew the business. People care. They don't necessarily want to like see you preaching it to their faces all the time. They want to just be able to make the right decision, And like if you make it easy for them to make the right decision, most of the time they'll be able to do that as long as it's not crazy expensive. I mean, seafood like
Mhm,
the price in seafood is like this, right? You can get dirt cheap seafood and you can get, super high priced seafood. Unfortunately, in North America, we're addicted to cheap, right? And there's no such thing as
mhm,
cheap food. Like something somewhere or someone has paid the price for that thing to be cheap, whether it's from another country, whether it's, poorly regulated, whether there's no science. Like the ocean is big, man, covers 2/3 of the planet. Like half the stuff that goes on out
mhm,
there, we have no idea.
definitely. And how do you see your life right now, Ned? Because I think, as you mentioned, right, this morning going for a walk and then having this doubt about the whole tuna thing that you mentioned. How is life right now? Do you feel still consider yourself a chef? I know you mentioned the chef are a core of these this kind of a system that you're building, but how far is it from the life that you had of just say working in the hotel as you were like running operations over there, seeing diners? A lot of chefs on the podcast have also mentioned that they miss this kind of instant gratification which you get while you're serving a guest and you get their feedback. And this job that you're doing right now, which I think can be a lot of time disappointing, a lot of time you could feel like you're not getting to reach what you wanted to. How is this dynamic in your personal professional life?
Well, firstly, there's no perfect. I mean, do I miss
Mm-hmm.
do I miss the kitchen? Absolutely. Do I want to be back in the
Mm-hmm.
kitchen 70 hours a week? Definitely not. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm wearing a chef's jacket. I love being a chef. I am in the kitchen at least 3 days a week somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Working on some
Mm-hmm.
project, I do a bunch of different things. And so I
Right.
could have only done this now or for the last 10 years. For the first 10 years, I was becoming a chef, finding my
Mm-hmm.
way, finding my voice. I still know that when I walk into the kitchen, I'm one of the best cooks in that kitchen. That's important to me. And I also know that I want to
Definitely.
still be able to be relevant in my profession, my craft, right? Because if I'm not relevant in my craft, then why would the next generation, the Vishes or the Tushars or
Mm.
the Imruns, why would they listen to me? Right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they'll be like, "Ah, yeah, he hasn't been in the kitchen forever, like no respect," whatever, right? Like I think it's
Definitely.
important. I feel like I'm sort of in two worlds, right? I'm in the
Mm-hmm.
sustainability advocacy world, education, and I'm also in the culinary world. And I don't want to give either of them up because I love working in restaurants. I love pre-shift. I love teams. I love front of house. I love getting in the dish area of every once in a while. I love expediting. I love talking to my suppliers. I don't want to do it 70 hours a week. So kind of feel really fortunate that I can do a little bit of both.
And impact wise, what do you think, Ned? Because that's also one topic that comes a lot on the podcast, because a lot of people I interview on the podcast are people who were, say, working in a restaurant or working in a hotel, and then they are now kind of, they feel this plunge of being able to impact. Maybe a lot of it is not even visible, like today maybe there are people making choices right now on ordering something which you have no idea about, but they are making this improved choice because of going through a session with you or a workshop with you, or going through a produce that has been, you have seen the back end of it. How does that, is that some sort of gratification that also compensates for this missing the kitchen drive or the heat or this working in restaurants?
Yeah, I don't know if you can see behind me there, over there. That's my cookbook
Now we
in
can.
the
Yes.
in the corner. That
Yeah.
I wrote that
Right.
I wrote that book in 2017. It's called Lure.
Huh.
I want to
Okay.
lure I want to lure people like fishing lure, right? I want to lure
Uh-huh.
people into
Exactly.
the conversation of sustainable seafood.
Mm-hmm.
Impact? Have we made an impact? Absolutely. At scale, I'm not sure. But I know that if I have impacted only a couple dozen people in my profession, they can then impact a couple dozen and a couple dozen and a couple dozen. No one, I mean, very few people are going to be able to have global impact. Like you'd mentioned Nomum before, like maybe
Mm-hmm.
Renee has global impact. There's a few other chefs that might have global impact, right? But
Mm-hmm.
most of us are doing work in our small communities, in our small country or our small province or our small territory. And we're just trying to have impact in our own universe. And for me, I'm pretty proud of that because we have a
Mm-hmm.
huge country. It's a thoughtful country that's trying to find its way in how we treated our indigenous and First Nations peoples. We're going through sort of reconciliation right now, nationally, and that's going to take generations because of the terrible things that we did to our indigenous and First Nations peoples. Um, we have so much to learn from them. We have so much to learn from our peers around the world. And I think that like I feel value in the work that I do. It keeps me engaged and makes me feel like I
Mm-hmm.
want to go forward. I mean, it's nice to be recognized, but like most of the work we do is like unrecognized, right? It's just you're championing something that matters to you. And to me, that's a core value as a human, like
Mm-hmm.
doing good things for the environment and for the ecosystem and for the community that you love. There's value in there. Doesn't pay the bills always, but
Mm-hmm.
it certainly fills my bucket. And, I feel fortunate. I love speaking on it. I love educating on it. I love like putting my boots on the ground of, fish farms or fisheries,
Mm-hmm.
just trying to gain knowledge and then share that knowledge. I've spoken at the UN before. I've spoken at all kinds of conferences and symposiums all over the world on this work. Like it takes hundreds, thousands of us to continue to do this work for us to have impact.
Mm-hmm.
Are the fisheries that I'm championing improving? Do I have much impact over that? Not really. I mean, of course not, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the people that are going to a restaurant and looking for, wild BC salmon instead of wild Russian salmon, or, not that it matters necessarily, but like it's not either or,
Mm-hmm.
but like the conversation around, borders and the conversation around farmed and wild, fresh and frozen, sustainable, like it's a big conversation. And I think someone goes to a grocery store or a restaurant and they make a better choice because of something they heard me say, that's a win for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a beautiful feeling, right? I think all that you've explained is only possible because you have to believe, as you said, you have to believe in the vision and the value and the purpose. And I think, yeah, it's beautiful listening to you and how much it's, for me, it's always very inspiring to listen to all the chefs on this podcast, and how people who, a lot of the industry, a lot of these research centers and governments do not count on them a lot. For a long time, chefs were seen as creative, but only within their boundary of putting things in a plate, and seen as a blue collar job, as you said in the beginning of the career, as it is a lot of replicating and multiplying. That was what their scope was limited to, and it's always nice to hear people like you and how impactful and how scalable this kind of a vision can be. And just on that, I would like to get your closing thoughts on what kind of advice would you give to other chefs who are listening to this, because as I said, we've had people like Nick from Canada himself who's doing things with foraging. We had Max few weeks ago who's creating a chocolate replacement through brewery waste. There's a lot of these ideas coming from people who were not expected to do these kind of jobs. They were expected to stay in kitchens and still be feeding diners. What kind of an advice would you give to somebody who's listening who maybe has a vision like yours, but they don't really have the courage to be able to dedicate time to it? As you said, you can only do this right now because you gave up on working 70 hours a week. What kind of advice would you give to such people?
Yeah, well, first of all, I love Nick. I've known Nick
Mm-hmm.
for years, and one of my most valued memories from my ride across Canada was at his kitchen with
Huh?
Michael Smith at the Inn of Bay
Yes.
Fortune. You know, it's a small community in Canada, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I would say like it's important to recognize my privilege again, because
Mm-hmm.
I can afford, through decades of hard work, to now be in this position where I can invest in myself to continue to do this work. Like if I want to fly to, you know, Toronto or Halifax or Spain or Boston or, you know, Shenzhen to the seafood show, I can do that
Mm-hmm.
without having to worry that my rent's not going to get paid. Right? So
Right.
that privilege is important to recognize. I
Mm-hmm.
have always done that, even when I couldn't afford it, because I just have this
Mm-hmm.
foolish belief that, more for than foolish belief, I have this like, this desire and this like pull to be a part of it, because I want to rub shoulders with those people, learn from them, and then be able to share it. I don't know where the return on investment's going to be, but I know that by doing it, it will have a return on investment at some point. You know, my advice to chefs is, well, firstly, invest in your career for at least a decade in
Mm-hmm.
the thing that you want to be good at first. I mean, my career's had multiple like layers, from super fine dining to hotels to premium casual and now advocacy, and I'm working in healthcare and I'm doing some other things. Like, none of us are going to have one career doing the same thing for 40 years. Like that just, you know, that doesn't exist in the same way that maybe it did, you know, after World War II for a lot of our, you know, grandparents,
Mm-hmm.
you know, doing the same thing, working for the same company, that kind of idea. You know, I think that's what's so great about food, is that you could work in hundreds of different jobs. Try and,
Mm-hmm.
you know, my advice, try and find your passion and just dive as deep into it as you possibly can and take risks, invest in
Mm-hmm.
yourself, bet on yourself, continue to like put yourself in the mix, in the middle of the conversations with the biggest people you can find, like the biggest players. You know, like I'm fascinated by marine biologists because they have so much to share with me about what happens under the ocean that no humans even think about. You know, when you look at an ocean, you just think, hey, that looks like a beautiful ocean and there's a sunset or a sunrise. You don't think about, you know, the thousands of things that are happening underneath, you know, right now, and the fact that boats are pillaging the ocean all over the planet, you know? Like, it's, as I said, overfishing and climate change, the two largest threats that face our world's oceans. I think that chefs can have something to do with those conversations, and we can impact how people choose seafood into the future. And I hope that people follow us, because I don't want to wear this hat forever. I want a bunch of great young
Mm-hmm.
chefs to, you know, take the torch from me when I hand it off to them, whenever that may be.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'm definitely going to link your work into the show notes, and I hope, and I know for a fact that the listeners will be inspired to listen to what you've shared right now, and hopefully we can see them as people who lead this kind of the movement that you're creating over here. And finally, I would like to thank you, Ned. I think you've shown us that a chef's role can go much beyond just the pass and expediting and building restaurants. Also, I will take note on the fact that you said, which is very important, I think, calculating your risks and taking a risk that's calculated, and also building yourself into the career, and not just jumping things because you wish or you have passion for, but kind of building that belief slowly and gradually. So thank you so much, and I hope to see a lot of work coming out of you and to share it with the platform.
Thank you, Furqan. Thanks. Have an awesome day, and look forward to collaborating with you again.